Hi, everyone. My name is Marko Novakov, and I'm with the College of Law, and I'm here to prepare this webinar for you about the College of Law Practical Legal Training Program as part of the Deakin Geelong Employability Series seminar. Now, before I officially get started with the presentation, I'd like to first make an important acknowledgement to country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are all present. I pay my deep respects to their elders, past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who will be watching this video recording. So right now, each of you are university law students, and I'm going to presume for the vast majority of you that you're interested in becoming a qualified lawyer. And as we're going to discuss in more detail in the next slide, there's a number of important steps you need to undertake before you can transition from a law student to a lawyer. So first thing you need to do is complete your university legal studies. And this is where you are essentially laying the foundations for a future career in the law. So with university, you're doing a lot of theoretical work. So the way we look at it, the college is you're building the boat. Next, what you're going to need to do is complete practical legal training, which I'll just refer to as PLT or practical legal training interchangeably from this point on. Practical legal training is different to your university studies because it's practice focused. So you're going to be working on practical skills that essentially lawyers do day in and day out. And so you can consider the practical legal training as your point in time where you're going to learn how to sail the boat that you've built. And what we're hoping is that you'll choose to undertake the college's PLT for us to help you navigate both those rough and rewarding waters of legal practice. Now, this slide illustrates a number of important steps to becoming a qualified lawyer. And so I'll go through them right now quite quickly, just so you're aware of them. So in Australia, across all states and territories, there are mandatory legislative requirements about what you need to do in order to become a qualified lawyer in terms of getting admitted into legal practice. And to get admitted into legal practice here in Victoria, it's governed by the Victorian Legal Admissions Board and pursuant to the Legal Profession Uniform Admission rules. Now, those rules essentially say two things when it comes to getting admitted into legal practice. First, obviously, you got to complete your university legal studies, and then thereafter you undertake practical legal training. And you can do that with an approved service provider like the College of Law. And once you complete your practical legal training, you get a graduate diploma of legal practice. And then you use this qualification in order to apply to the Victorian Admissions Board for getting admitted into legal practice. And part of that step is for the Victorian Admissions Board to determine whether you're a fit and proper person. So it's essentially a character test. And now for the very vast majority of law students, this really isn't going to be a concern for you. But for some of you, if there is any issues related to academic plagiarism or potentially criminal convictions, then this is something you need to disclose to the admissions board because it forms part of that important character test. And as you'll find out, once you get into legal practice and you become a practicing lawyer, every year you need to declare you're a fit and proper person in order to renew your practicing certificate. But as I said, for the very vast majority of you, you'll get admitted into legal practice. This is usually happens at the Supreme Court. And then you can choose thereafter what you would like to do. So you can practice as a solicitor, you can practice as a barrister, or you can even choose to have a non-legal role. The benefit of completing the PLT, however, is that once you get that done and dusted and you're admitted into legal practice, you can decide to practice as a lawyer anytime you want or to take a break. It all really depends on you. So as I mentioned, there are these mandatory requirements about what you must do to become a qualified lawyer, but there's also mandatory requirements as to what forms the PLT. So every PLT has competency standards, and every PLT service provider, like the College of Law, has to meet those competency standards in order to deliver an approved PLT program. And so this is based on the Law Admissions Consultative Committee. And according to them, every PLT must contain these three components. So firstly, there's coursework. But as I'm going to discuss later, the PLT coursework is practice focused. It's practical. So it's not the theoretical work you do at universities. So it's the equivalent to postgraduate training. Secondly, every PLT must have some form of mandatory assessment. But don't worry, the assessment at the PLT level is very different to what you do at university. So as I'll explain later, no exams, no essays, and no assignments. The way you get assessed with the college's PLT is the same way a junior lawyer gets assessed by their supervising senior lawyer. And thirdly, every PLT must have a work experience component. And this is because work experience is so fundamental to your professional training and development. So now I've just given you a general introduction into practical legal training and all of those requirements that must be met in terms of competency standards for the PLT, but also to get admitted into legal practice. So now I'm ready to move on to actually talk about the college's PLT. Now, there's a lot of benefits to undertaking the college's PLT, but I don't have enough time to talk about all of them. So I'm going to focus on these four major benefits that I've identified here in the PowerPoint slide. So I'll briefly discuss each of them now and then in more detail as I move on. So the first major benefit of the college's PLT is the program structure. As I'm going to discuss, it's designed to emulate what junior lawyers do in actual legal practice. Secondly, as I'll discuss in more detail, there's a lot of flexible learning options. So you can choose to study with us 100% online or do some face-to-face as well. You can study part-time, full-time, day, night, evening classes, etc. So as you'll see, there's a lot of flexibility involved in undertaking our PLT. Thirdly, we genuinely care about your success. So as I'll discuss in more detail, we set you up for success the moment you enroll in our PLT. And the fourth major benefit I'm going to talk about is why we are trusted by the legal profession. And there's a number of important reasons for that, but I'll just give you a quick sneak peek right now. Essentially, there are more than 30 leading national and international law firms here in Australia that trust only the College of Law to deliver practical legal training to their law graduates. So that's something important to keep in the back of your mind. So in terms of those four major benefits, the first one I'm going to talk about is the program structure. And with the college's PLT, there's three core components of it. Now, the first two, coursework and work experience, we've already talked about because it forms part of the mandatory PLT competency standards. But this third one, continuing professional education, is very unique to the College of Law. And the reason it's included as part of the college's PLT is because this is what practicing lawyers must do in order to renew their practicing certificates every year. So as I'll explain in more detail, every lawyer has to undertake 10 hours of continuing professional education in order to be allowed to practice every year. And for that reason, because the college's PLT emulates what lawyers do in actual practice, this is why it forms a core component of the college's PLT. And there's a lot of benefits to our continuing professional education modules, as I'll explain in more detail later. As I mentioned, there are mandatory requirements for these PLT competency standards, and that includes 5 compulsory subjects and 2 electives. Now, these 2 electives, as you can see, they are predominantly based on substantive law. But when it comes to the compulsory subjects, they're really focused on 3 areas. So one is substantive law. The second is lawyers' skills, which I'll talk to you in more detail shortly. And thirdly, it's about values. And when we're talking about values, this is your ethical and professional obligations as a practicing lawyer. So this Lawyers' Skills Week is really unique and it's a lot of fun. The way we cover it at the college is that you attend a 1-week intensive, essentially a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, like a typical work week, right? And so as part of the Lawyers' Skill Week, you'll be meeting with all of your peers, you'll be with a cohort of yours, and you get a chance to do a lot of fun interactive activities. So for example, you'll be doing role-playing activities that mimic what lawyers do in everyday practice. So there'll be client interviewing, negotiation, alternative dispute resolution, and even mooting. but you also do some legal drafting. There'll be a specific session on problem solving and risk management, and also one on ethics and professional responsibility. So once you complete this 1 week, then you're able to move on to do the other course components. And so if, for example, you were undertaking the college's PLT full-time, you would be undertaking a full 15 weeks of coursework. So you would do the first week as your lawyer skills week, and then the additional 14 weeks would be coursework you would do online. Now, it's important to bear in mind that the college's coursework is more than just activities and tasks. Very importantly, it's about the invaluable feedback and one-on-one review sessions you're going to have with your PLT supervisor. And your PLT supervisor is always going to be a senior lawyer that's employed by the college. So the way it works with the college in terms of the coursework itself is, firstly, you're going to enroll in the PLT and get access to an online learning management system. Essentially what you would have right now with Deakin, with your online learning portal. And the online learning management portal we use is Canvas. And through Canvas, you're going to get access to a lot of reading materials and resources. You'll also get access to what we call practice papers. So these are, for example, draft court documents, draft wills, draft contracts and leases that have been prepared by actual lawyers engaged by the college. And we provide that to you as a helpful learning resource while you're undertaking the various tasks and activities. So first, once you're enrolled and you get access to these online learning materials, this is your opportunity to do a lot of pre-reading and preparing. And then we're going to put you into the full swing of things by getting you to practice the day-to-day so you can actually master the day-to-day. And so this is where, for example, you're going to start off with your lawyer skill week to do all those very fun interactive role-playing activities I mentioned, but then you'll get an opportunity to do other components of the coursework that include legal drafting, such as drafting court documents, letters of advice to clients, wills, contracts, leases, etc. So again, this is where you practice the day-to-day to master the day-to-day. But what's really important is that you're going to get feedback in one-on-one review sessions about all of your activities and submissions. And what's really good about the PLT is you're not getting graded on your activities and submissions. This is not what happens at universities. So there's no A, B, C, or D or anything like that. Rather, the kind of feedback you get at this level with the college's PLT is the kind of feedback a junior lawyer would get from their supervising senior lawyer in actual practice. So for example, if you prepared a letter of advice to a client and you submitted that to your PLT supervisor for review, they would review it as a senior lawyer and say, look, you've done a great job on this section of the advice, but maybe I need you to explore this a little bit further. And if that's the case, you get the opportunity to get this constructive feedback in a supportive environment. And it helps you gauge the level of understanding that you have at that time, but also you're going to be upskilling from getting this feedback, and then the opportunity to tidy up that mock advice to the client and resubmit it for final approval. So again, no A, B, C, or D, but an opportunity to do what lawyers do in actual legal practice, which is get that feedback from your supervisor and then have an opportunity to resubmit it. So for example, this is exactly what I did as a junior lawyer when I started off with Gaydon's Lawyers. I would prepare a letter of advice to a client. It would initially go to the senior associate to review. They would give me feedback. I'd make some amendments and revisions, and then I'd hand it over to the partner for finalization and progression. And then after you get this invaluable feedback, you have an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation on one-on-one review with your PLT supervisor. And you get to do at least 6 of these one-on-one review sessions to cover all the different areas of the coursework. And these one-on-one review sessions are really constructive conversations. This is your opportunity to sit down with your supervisor to talk about your level of understanding of the coursework that you're doing. You might get asked some questions to answer just to gauge your understanding, but you also might be asked to deal with a hypothetical scenario. So your PLT supervisor might say, all right, well, in terms of this corporations law part of the coursework, imagine you get a client that walks into the door with this specific issue. What would you advise them? Now, this is what actual senior lawyers do with their junior lawyers in practice. So for example, I would often get my partner that would come and drop a file on my desk and say, Marko, I need you to review this file and come see me in 30 minutes so we can talk about what to do next. So fortunately, as part of the PLT, you get a lot more than 30 minutes to do a file preparation. But essentially, all of that studying you've been doing as part of the coursework will prepare you for those one-on-one review sessions. So I've spoken to you about the coursework as one of the components of the PLT. The next one is the work experience requirement. As I mentioned earlier, work experience is so fundamental to your professional training and development. This is why we treat it so very seriously at the college. But at the same time, we recognize that we have some students with competing life obligations, and for that reason, we have 3 flexible options available to all of our students. So the first option I'm going to talk about is the standard option, and it is the most popular one, and there's a very clear reason for that. So the vast majority of our students who undertake the college's PLT, by the time they actually enroll in the PLT, they've either got previous relevant work experience, or they're employed in a law firm or with a community legal center already doing some role, such as, let's say, paralegal or legal assistant, or they may be a law graduate in a law firm. And the benefit of that is this. If you've been working as a paralegal or a legal assistant, let's say for a couple of years, you're able to claim all of that previous work experience for up to 2 years to claim up to 60 days of that 75-day requirement. So if you've been working as a paralegal, let's say starting this month, and you enroll in the PLT next month, by then you'll have accumulated at least 60 days of work experience that you can claim towards that 75 days. And so what that means is when it comes to enrolling in the PLT and you have to do the workplace component, you only end up having to do 15 days of actual work placement because you've claimed that 60 days from prior work experience. So to give you an example of what counts as previous work experience, could be clerkships, legal assistant or paralegal. Perhaps you're working at a community legal center or have a placement with legal aid. Maybe you're assisting barristers in their chambers, or perhaps you're a judge's associate by the time you enroll in the PLT. This is exactly what I did. So I was working as a judge's associate for a couple of months before I enrolled in the PLT, and I was able to use all of that work experience towards the work placement requirements as part of my PLT. And so that's why the vast majority of our students, they go with the 75-day option because they've already got this accumulated work experience, or they're already working in a legal role of some kind while they're undertaking the PLT. So it's very easy to meet that requirement. But for some of our students, they do have competing life obligations. Some of them are primary caregivers. Others, they may have full-time jobs in a non-legal role. And they may need that full-time job to pay rent, to pay the fees, to cover expenses, etc. And so they want to keep that full-time job. And for that reason, we have 2 flexible options. And the first one I'll talk about is the clinical experience module. This is where you only need to undertake 15 days of actual work experience. But in lieu of that important 60 days you're missing out on, you undertake an additional 6-week online program. Now, this 6-week online program covers course content that's similar to what you already do as part of the standard PLT, but goes over and above that. Another option is the in-practice component. Now, this only exists because the regulators across Australia decided they needed to have a viable alternative for work placement components during the severe lockdowns that we had following the outbreak of COVID. This is where students were having trouble finding work placement. And so the regulators decided that they would allow for each of the PLT service providers to have the option of no work placement, but to have some additional coursework to be in substitute for that. So with the college's in-practice component, you can have no days of actual work placement, but you undertake an additional 8-week online program and you get one-on-one mentoring sessions. Again, this is intended to emulate actual legal practice and to do our best to substitute for that important work experience that you're not going to be getting, meaning hands-on in an actual legal setting. So that third component of the college's PLT, as I mentioned earlier, is continuing professional education. This is where you undertake 10 hours of self-paced online interactive modules. But the best thing about those modules is they're focused on the latest and most emerging trends in the legal profession, which is legal tech and innovation. But it also covers business skills. This is because if you ever want to run your own legal practice, you're going to need to have business experience and skills. And this is why legal tech and business skills form part of this continuing professional education component that we have. And the great part too is after you complete it, you get an additional certificate of legal tech and business. So that's another qualification to have up your sleeve, and you can add that to your CV and share it with your employers as well. So as I mentioned earlier, all practicing lawyers need to undertake 10 hours of continuing professional education in order to renew their practicing certificates on an annual basis. And this is why we have that as a component of our college PLT, because as I mentioned earlier, our PLT is intended to emulate what actual lawyers do in practice. So I've spent to you some time now talking about the college's PLT in general in terms of the coursework and how that's one of the major benefits of undertaking the college's PLT. Now I'm going to speak to you about the other benefits of the college's PLT, starting with flexibility. So whether you want to study 100% online or have face-to-face, we have those options available for you. You can choose to study full-time at 15 weeks or part-time at 30 weeks. And if you want to do study part-time, maybe you just want to do evening courses, and that's an option available for you as well. But the most important aspect in terms of flexibility of the college's PLT is the fact that we have rolling intakes every single month. So for example, whether it's full-time or part-time, we've been running a PLT intake every month from May of this year all the way until June next year. So if you graduated at the end of this year from university and you wanted to enroll in a PLT next year early on, well, we have dates available for you January all the way through June at this stage. So there's always going to be a date that suits you. The third major component of the college's PLT is that we genuinely care about your success. So you'll have a dedicated support team from the moment you enroll in the PLT, but you'll also have ongoing entitlements and benefits as a college graduate, even after you complete the PLT. So as a PLT student, you'll have a student liaison officer and a supervisor, but you'll also get access to our national careers team, including Susan Pincus, who's our national careers coach. Susan has more than 20 years in the human resources industry, and she does a lot of one-on-one sessions with our PLT students. So she can help you with job searches, she can help you tailor your resume, she can even help you with preparing for job interviewing questions. So she's an excellent resource. And so she's available to help you whether you're employed or not. So let's say you do have a role at this time, but you wanted to find another role. She can help you do that as well. And the greatest part about all of this, as I mentioned earlier, is even after you complete the PLT, you still have ongoing access to Susan as part of our ongoing benefits and entitlements for college alumni. Another important aspect of being a college alumni is all the connections that you're going to develop. So not only with your fellow peers as you're undertaking the PLT, but also with your supervisors. And even after you graduate, and let's say you run your own legal practice in the future, as an alumni, you're able to have access to the college's job board. So you might run your own practice and you can advertise for jobs on the college's jobs board. And for example, to get PLT students to work with you so they can fulfill their own workplace requirements. The fourth major and final benefit of the college's PLT, which I have time to discuss tonight, is the fact that we are trusted by the legal profession and by students. And that's for a number of important reasons. Firstly, it's our expertise. We are the largest provider of practical legal training in all of Australasia. We have offices in Australia, Asia, New Zealand, and even now, most recently in London in the UK. And in Australia alone, we have 19 different locations from which you can undertake the PLT. And so the point I'm trying to say with that is the college has both an international and national expertise, but we also have local boots on the ground. So local experts, lawyers in Victoria that are there to deliver the PLT, but they have this national pool of resources from which we develop the PLT and focus on continuous improvement as well. We've also been delivering practical legal training to law students in Australia for nearly 50 years, so since 1974. And as I mentioned earlier, we are trusted by the legal profession to be the sole provider of practical legal training to their law graduates. So that's more than 30 leading international and national law firms in Australia. And you will be familiar with them in terms of those top-tier law firms. So I think that's something really important to keep back in your mind, that there are law firms out there that exclusively trust only the college to deliver the PLT to their law students, because again, our college, PLT, emulates what junior lawyers do in actual legal practice. So I've spoken to you about those four major benefits of the college's PLT, and I also want to make a brief mention about our Center for Legal Innovation. So this is an innovation-focused think tank at the college. It's comprised of college staff, but also external lawyers from law firms and legal tech startups. We have an online resources hub, which you can get a lot of information, including videos and podcasts. We have a legalpreneurs lab for those of you that are really focused on legal tech and innovation and you want to be creative. But most importantly, it's a free student membership. And the point I'd like to make here is that the college is at the forefront of the latest emerging trends in the legal profession, and they are heavily focused on legal tech and innovation. So you can be very rest assured that if you undertake the college's PLT, you'll get all the skills that you need to excel not only today, but well into the future. Now, just like with your university legal studies, there is a fee to undertaking the practical legal training program. If you're a permanent resident or Australian citizen, the fee is $9,640. That's the standard fee, and fee help, of course, is available. Now, if you're an international student, unfortunately, the fee is a little bit higher. I, for example, when I undertook my PLT, I did it as an international student, so it did cost me a bit more, but you get over it. You just bite the dust, and then it's done and you move on. Now, as I also mentioned earlier, there are those additional options available for you in terms of the work experience component. So as I mentioned, you could do the clinical experience module with the additional 6 weeks of online coursework. And there, because of that additional coursework, there's an additional fee of $1,500. Again, that's completely optional to you. And the other one is that in-practice component where there's no actual days of work placement, and there's the additional 8 weeks of coursework. And again, because there's the additional coursework, there'll be an additional fee of $2,000 to cover that. But essentially, you just pay for what you need. So that's the end of this PLT presentation. I'm really glad for those of you that have had the opportunity to watch this and learn from it. And if you want to get more information about the college, please do connect with us in any way you can. So that is my college email, but you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to get more information about enrollment and the application process, that I encourage you to contact Charlie Burrell. She's very helpful to our Victorian students. That is her email to contact her directly, but you can also call us on our national hotline number. And finally, if you want to get more general information about the college's PLT, you can find more information on our website. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, or even Facebook. So that's pretty much it for me. I'm really glad I had this opportunity to deliver this presentation to you about practical legal training as part of the Employability Series seminar. I wish you all the best, and I'd be very happy to hear from you and connect from you. Take care, everyone.